Well, before we get to a song and wrap things up, one final question, at least one. We'll see if you go like 10 seconds with the answer, we'll have two final questions.
Well, all right, I'll figure out some way to stretch this out.
This one was sent to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from Jonathan McFadden in Ireland. Why do you think a match between Hulk Hogan and Stone Cold Steve Austin never happened? Also, how would you have booked this match given the opportunity?
Well, the reason why it never happened is because Hulk Hogan, there was never a position in time where Hulk Hogan could have won that match. And that's,
I thought Austin refused because, Rock got Hogan at WrestleMania. We did the watch along of that match. I thought they wanted it to be Hogan versus Austin, and Austin just wasn't willing to do business with Hogan because of how he was treated in WCW.
Well, yeah, but that's what I'm saying. You think Hogan was going to do the fucking job for Austin?
He did the job to Rock.
Look at the job he did. I'm sure Austin is probably proud of, and rightfully so, that he's the one major guy that never laid down for Hogan. And I honestly believe because of the difference, The Rock could get away with doing the job for Hogan a lot easier than Austin could. Because of The Rock's personality, because of the way that they just went with that and had that match. Honestly, I don't think Austin could have pivoted and switched to the point that The Rock was able to do in that match when he saw that the people were just going that way, because Steve would have had to have been more like Steve Austin to be Steve Austin. I think it would have been a disappointment if he'd have started doing the stuff that Rock did, but because Rock has that, Austin's got a badass streak, but he doesn't have a smartass streak, right? The Rock has that fucking grin and that pie-eating look and that fucking smartass streak, and he could get by with shit like that just subliminally into people's heads. I think Hogan insisting on beating Austin would have hurt Austin more than Hogan beating The Rock, because both of them really came out of it fine. Rock went to Hollywood and Hogan went on with his life. So I think that's the thing is that Austin didn't ever have to do it. There was no business reason for it to be done. And, Hogan, he didn't miss that match because he missed the payoff. He missed that match because that's the one fucking check mark he didn't get to get. And now, if Hogan had been willing to do a job for Austin, then maybe Austin would have gone for it and they could have had that match and drawn the gate, because it would have been a mega fucking gate. But he didn't have to.
What about Austin refusing to work with Jeff Jarrett?
I can understand that both ways, because the story is true, by the way. The oft-repeated story that Austin was still pissed at Jeff because of the way that he was treated when he went to Tennessee from Texas, and the time that Jeff came in, Austin's staring at his fucking check. And I've seen those big old blue checks signed by Bob Wright, the official bookkeeper for Jarrett Promotions. And at that time, those things for 6 days were between $275 and $300 in that low period when Austin was there. So he's looking at the check, and Jeff comes in and says, "Hey, if you keep looking at it, it ain't going to change," or something like that. And that's the kind of something that Steve could remember fucking 20 years later. And I said, the story has been told. And I said this before, and somebody actually tweeted this to me not long ago. "You told the story wrong, Cornette. I'd said Austin was broke in Tennessee and was living on fucking baked potatoes." Story was wrong. They were raw. He wasn't baking them. Well, there were no microwaves. If he got near an oven, I assumed he'd bake the potato. But yes, he did eat some raw potatoes. But the point is, whether they be baked potatoes or baking potatoes, that's all he was fucking eating, right? And Danny Davis called him aside at the Coliseum one night and just gave him words of encouragement, said, "Hey, I know it's rough now, but, you've really got something and you should stick with this. You'll be good." And because Austin was thinking about quitting, and that's, he stuck with it. And that's why 20 years later, we did the show at the Christmas Chaos at the Louisville Gardens for OVW. And all I had to do to book Austin was call Bruce Pritchard and say, hey, are you in catering at Raw? Are you near Steve Austin? Ask him if he wants to make $25,000 in a brown paper bag and all the fucking beer he can drink for doing a favor for Danny Davis. And he says he'll do it. Okay. And I called him Clear Channel back and said, we just sold out the Gardens. That's all it took. And Steve got his 25 and so did we. But anyway, that's the kind of, Steve remembers people that are good to him and he remembers people that are not good to him. And sometimes those memories manifest themselves at certain crucial points. I don't blame him for not doing the match with Goldberg either and going home and walking out. That's what stars used to do. And he said he handled it the wrong way. But actually he didn't, because he told him a number of times, why in the world would we have this match? Or it was him and Brock. Did I say Goldberg? Him and Brock Lesnar.
Yeah.
They wanted to have on free TV. I got Goldberg on the brain from last week. Him and Brock, they wanted to have on free TV, and he knew that was crazy. And he said no a bunch of times, and they tried to talk him into it. So he said, okay, I'll be right back, and he just fucking left. Why would you give that match away on free TV at that point in time nearly 20 years ago? It was fucking stupid. Guys used to be able to take care of themselves and their image and their business like that, and they also used to have the leverage to, because if somebody did that now, they'd say, okay, fuck you, go home, you're released, future endeavored. But you don't want to fucking fire a guy like Steve Austin. As it turned out, he came back sparingly, but that was mostly because of his neck. But you ain't going to fire fucking Steve Austin. They didn't want to. They finally, it was like they buried him for a while and they made up as quick as he'd come back. But now nobody's important, as we've just been talking about. But anyway, I think that's the thing. There was no benefit to having that match unless Austin would have won it. It wasn't going to get Hogan over anymore at that point. The thing with Hogan in Toronto at the match with Rock, that was the perfect place, because Toronto was Hogan's city, and that was the perfect place for that to be had. But and they probably would have turned against Austin in Toronto too. But if they'd have been in Houston, that would have been interesting, like they were the previous year at the Astrodome and had Hogan and Austin. That would have been real interesting. Then Mr. Hogan may have had to try to remember how to be a heel, or else the whole thing would have fallen apart.